Hello everybody, and yes, this is, or no I should say, this is not coming live. Our Thursday evening, 7:30, What's Our Story? And we have, well, our story is that we like to surf a couple of times a week. This is Peter Woff. How you doing?
Good, Phil.
What is it that you love about the ocean, mate?
There's something very refreshing. Life gets a bit hectic, and out there it's very peaceful. Like we've just come in today from an absolutely gorgeous day, clear water, sun's out, and it just makes life so much better.
There is something that brings peace, and I think that's probably as good a place to start the conversation as any. Pete and I first met. Pete does Pete's Silly Quiz when we're not COVID in, doing that thing. Some great quiz nights, trivia nights at pubs and that sort of thing, and that's how we first met. That's got to be 3 years ago.
Probably a bit longer than that, I would say.
Maybe it's 4, okay.
Yeah, time flies.
And I can remember the first time that we got to start talking about kind of the stuff of life and things of God and that kind of thing. It was during a break in the trivia, the drinks break.
Yep.
And you said, Phil, I've been thinking that there's something that's bigger than me. If life is only about me, then it's whatever I want. It's however much sex, money, drugs, whatever. But if there's something more than that, then how do I live in that? And we've been talking about that for the last 2 or 3 years.
We've had some great conversations. Some we agree on, some we disagree, but the ability to talk and get somebody else's point of view is just, I think, is what makes friendships, what makes us humans, and we seem to have lost that in so many conversations at the moment.
Yeah. So what was it, or what has it been that brought you to that sort of way of thinking, that life doesn't revolve around me, but there is something that is larger and of purpose to which I have a responsibility to live?
I guess having kids and the kids having kids, you look at life differently in the way you want the best for them, and then you maybe look back on your own life and say, well, when I had this money, when I had this car, when I had this house, did it make me happy? And I've been rich, I've been broke, and the happiness level didn't really move that much, which is strange. You would think if you lived in $1 million mansion, you'd be happy as Larry, but I've met some very miserable rich people, and I've met some beautifully happy, what we would term as poor people.
And you've done that cycle a couple of times.
Yeah.
The top of the hill and the bottom of it. Maybe that's why you like surfing. But I wonder if you had something more than happiness. Happiness always seems to me like a moment's pleasure. It's that 4 seconds I had on that wave, and it's gone. But there's something else that kind of sits, that's foundational underneath that.
Well, to me, there's a lot of happiness, like you say. Riding the wave gives you 4 seconds of pleasuring. Being out there with you in amongst few other surfers, just enjoying it, will keep me going all day, probably all week, and that's kind of why I do it.
The idea of something larger. How do you tap into the God idea? Because this is something we've also talked about.
Yes. When you look back on life, it seems to be pretty easy to go, well, gee, life was going like this, and then bang, this happened. And most of my big moments in life, be they good or bad, are just what we might call coincidence. But then you look at other people's life, the same thing, how you got to this point, how we met, some of the best things and the worst things in life you can track. So, it's always the argument, are we sort of predestined to do what we do?
Oh, please don't get all Calvinist on me. Gee whiz.
In which case we might as well just go surfing all day.
And then we're at the mercy of the fates.
Yes.
Okay.
Or can we influence it? And I've got to believe that we can, to some degree, influence our life, other people's lives around us.
So is there in that even a third possibility that what we might do is respond to whatever this power is and live well within that? So it's not all about I have to shape the world and I have to save the world and all that kind of stuff, but equally I'm just not sitting back and being swept along, but that I'm trying to live in some sort of a harmony, I would say, with the purpose of God. That God's got a way that's good to live as a human, best for me, and if I get into that, then those other bits and pieces, at least in some way, start to make some sense.
Well, we're going to get into the conversation of if we've got rules to live by, well then where's our free will? And I just believe somewhere in amongst us there's an inane moral compass that we all choose to ignore or choose to follow. And I guess that would be some might call, the God within us. We know what's right, we know what's wrong. We don't always do what's right. And therein lies the angst. Even, I pickpocket you, I've got myself $1,000, you beauty. Can't sleep for the next 5 years, but that's, that's the kind of cause and effect that we have.
Yeah.
So we've got to live, to me, within something that suits us. And I say, well, Phil, you've dropped your wallet, there's $1,000. I'll be happy with that. I don't have the $1,000, but I don't have sleepless nights for 5 years.
Okay. If you've just joined us on What's Our Story, we do this within the Bells Faith community every Thursday evening about 7:30. I'm Phil Smith, I'm the pastor of this mob, and Peter Woff is a mate of mine with whom I surf. At least we try a couple of times a week, and we often get to talk about stuff from some pretty different perspectives about faith and life.
So can we ask you,
Sure.
Pastor Phil?
You can do the
jump
interview.
in. What turned you on to your faith? Tell me about Phil Smith as a little boy.
Yeah, I've been wondering about that a bit lately. Well, my dad sort of was three things. He was a butcher, and his dad abandoned their family, and this was just before World War II. And Dad had to, I think, make some decisions about what kind of bloke he would be. Anyway, so he had to leave school, so he was a butcher. Then he joined the army and he served in Morotai, in that what is now Indonesia, part of the Southwest Pacific in World War II. And then something happened to him during that period, and he decided that faith in Jesus was the way to go. And after the war, he tried to get back to his trade and some other things. Anyway, he ended up as a Methodist minister. And my growing up, I suppose, like beyond childhood, but into being a teenager and consciously having to think things through, was in North Queensland in the early to mid 70s. There was an awful lot of cheesecloth and long hair, and
They were the good days.
they were
when
we had hair, yeah.
Yes.
And at that time, I remember, like, I was never pressured or pushed into matters of faith, but it was a steady, like, if I think of it, I often reflect upon my dad. He's been dead for 5 years now. And he was, like, he made choices. I think there probably would have been times when he could have done what his dad did, but he chose not to. He stayed. And he was never kind of the dad who taught me how to fix motor mowers or, whatever else. It just wasn't him. But he was steady, and the way he lived and his faith was always kind of the foundation of that. So I kind of looked at that. Then in my teenage years, I was curious about all kinds of things. I read an English translation of the Quran to try to get my head into that. Swami Prabhupada Bhaktivedanta was a bit big when I was at high school. Transcendental meditation,
Yes,
that kind
yes.
of. I read the Noble Truths and the Paths of Buddhism. and I would have been 16, I think, and it was an Easter, and the Jesus penny dropped, and I thought this is the story that makes sense to me, that God would want to come and live with us, good, bad and ugly, and look us in the eye and say, I get it, I've been there, done that, I know what it is like for you to have good mates, to go fishing, to hang out at the beach, to be betrayed by your good mates, to go to weddings and parties. I even know what dying is like, and I can tell you that there's a new way to live. And I sort of bought into that, and that has remained with me over the years. And I suppose I was surrounded by good people. There were a bunch of young people who were on the same journey, and the share houses were always open, and you could drop in and sleep on the couch, and there was always conversations like this going on, and that's how that began. And I've had a really good, like my wife Kayleen is just this solid Christ follower who keeps me grounded. Yeah, so that's kind of where that is.
Do you think those conversations are still happening with the young people today? We're roughly the same age,
Yep.
And it seemed that when we were growing up, we were all actually, you talk about the Swami, I remember that, looking for something more than just making our first million. Or do we think that's a couple of old men just...
I don't know. I really don't know. And that does trouble me a bit. I think, look, I have had some of those or overheard or been invited into a couple of those conversations. But yeah, life seems so, I don't know, crowded with a whole bunch of stuff that...
And all the self-help gurus, which we seem to have a lot of these days, and it is self-help. It's about, what can I do to get higher? I'll climb over Phil so I get the job.
Help yourself too.
Yes.
Yeah.
To what end? And that's why we have these, value our wonderful conversations about, where's it going to? The fact that we're born to die, sort of, sooner or later you need that conversation. Well, what's going to happen at the end?
And I was talking to a mate the other day who said to me, 5 months ago, when everything was great, I had no space for God at all, no need of, and now that I have discovered for various reasons that life is finite, I feel like a complete hypocrite, but I'm asking people to pray for me. I want to know how to pray. I want to get in touch. And I guess my response to that was, rather than beat yourself up and say I'm a hypocrite, and look, in a sense that's true, but aren't we all? But maybe this is a wonderful opportunity that God taps you on the shoulder and says, well, there's an end point, and do you want that, or do you want a non-ending point? What is the purpose of this life? I was listening to a book that had been launched. It was in Sydney just before all the COVID stuff, and there was an atheist, a Christian, and somebody else, and it was this idea of the meaning of life, and there was a conversation between 2 or 3 people with their perspectives. And the atheist lady, really intelligent woman, and solid to listen to. And she was saying, look, we are just like every other breathing creature. We get born and we die, and that's it. That's it. And the host of the panel said to her, so can you kiss your 2-year-old granddaughter goodnight and say, good night, darling, you are no more important than the cow we just ate steak of at dinner, or the fish that swim in the ocean, or your dog. Sleep well, good night. And she had to say, well, no, there's something in me that actually says that person has some kind of intrinsic value that is, and there it is. How do we explore that?
And added to my take on life is that when I was about 9 or 10, I drowned in a swimming pool, and like so many people with near-death experiences, could see myself at the bottom of the pool, could hear what was going on, and had the best feeling ever. So, Phil, if you get run over by a bus, I will be sorry, I will miss you, but I know at some stage, your body will just turn off and you will go to what you call heaven. And I didn't make it to heaven or nirvana or whatever, but my soul, and scientists can't explain that. I was still alive even though I was dead. So you talk to anybody who has the same experience, they're in operations, they're clinically dead, but they're still going. So that gives me a lot of hope.
Does this tie into what we were talking about before with our suspicion that young people are not having conversations about matters of the spirit and faith and God? Because when we're surrounded by so much and our value says if I can touch it, if I can put a price tag on it, then it's real.
Yes.
And the idea of soul, spirit, faith that I cannot touch and I cannot substantiate, well then that can't be validated.
Because very shortly, and even now, we can clone Phil Smith. We can take a bit of you and clone him. But we don't clone the
world does not deserve that.
The essence of Phil Smith is not going to be the same. Dolly the sheep wasn't the same. Even though we can clone you and make you physically look the same, what makes us Phil Smith? It's that grey matter, it's the soul, call it what you like. But we can clone 100 of you. And anybody who's got multiple kids, they can be so different from the same DNA. They're just so different. So
that uniqueness is such a fabulous idea, and that's another thing that amazes me about the idea of God, that each of us bears the image of God, and yet each of us quite unique.
Yeah.
And that's, again, one of the great mystery things that I say I can't touch, but I believe to be true. It's a bit like being in love with Kayleen. I actually can't prove to you that she loves me. I have no way of proving that. I can't quantify it. I can't in any way say, look, see, there it is,
She stayed with you for how long? 30 years?
Yeah, I mean... So, and yet I know that's the case. And when other people look at it, I hope they go, yeah, I can see that. So there's something in this thing of life that is about what we cannot see and what we cannot touch, and yet we know to be true.
And you're a very successful man in that.
Well,
30 plus years, is it?
Yeah, 35, I think.
I'm lucky to do 30 plus seconds, but we live in somewhat of a disposable world where don't like the car, chuck it out, get a new one. We won't fix it, we'll just buy a new one. The fridge is broken down, we don't get somebody to come in now. Another one. The girlfriend, she's driving me nuts. Throw her out, get a new one. We have come my parents were together for over 60 years. And that's a long time, that's their whole life. And they must have gone through, the woman was maybe seen to be lesser in what we know today.
Yeah, but there's a generation.
Yeah, but they knew their roles, played their roles. She looked after us kids. He made the money, and that was it worked for them. But now we seem to be in a generation where it's all up in the air. What's my role? What's my role as a man? I date you, I open the door for you. Well, that's wrong. Is that right?
Second guessing ourselves
Yes.
on everything.
Yeah.
And maybe that's where some of the it's all about me stuff comes in, because there are some things I want to be certain of and I want to have for myself, and so that's an easy sort of a swirl to fall into. Mate, I want to ask you a bit about Jesus. Now you were talking about, why did I choose that faith journey, and the answer is,
You didn't like the Buddhist?
No, I did, but I found it to be an isolationist and selfish thing. If I can remove myself from suffering, if I don't have to suffer, if I can come to a point of peace well then that's the purpose of the exercise. Now, I'm oversimplifying, and I don't wish to do that to anybody else's belief. But I guess the thing I liked about the idea of Jesus is one who says, well, I'll actually take the thorns and not try to avoid suffering, but in fact engage with life in all that is good and hard. I think what he called an abundant life, a full life. It's got the whole 9 yards to it. But as somebody who kind of looks at this and just is looking at it, what do you like about Jesus as a role model, perhaps?
Well, I liked, and I'm not sure whether it's still trendy these days. There was
Trendy.
probably not. There was a kind of movement. What would Jesus do? I actually quite like that, because if you're quite often you don't know what the right, correct moral ground is, and what should I do, or now what would Jesus do? I think that actually gives quite a good mindset to, okay, let's take it away from me. Now, what is the right movement? So I don't know what you think about that, or
no, I think that's I think there's something that's essential in that way of living, and it's funny you should mention it, because with Bells we are looking at what is it to be a disciple, and if Jesus just says, "Come follow me," then I think that's along the same line as what you're talking about. He says, "Come and live like me."
Yeah.
And that's not only what he does, but who he is and how he thinks and the rhythm of his life, and so I think you're right, it's not a bad question at all. What would it be for my life to look more like Jesus' life? Well, it's got to be good for people around me.
Yes.
And probably good for me too. Somebody
stole my car park before we hit the horn. What would Jesus? It's only a car park. Move on.
Yeah. I got to tell you, when you asked about, when I was first coming to faith, there was a bit of a thing at that time, wherever 2 or more are gathered in my name, there will be a guitar, and it was all that kind of stuff. And you'd drive into town and you'd ask, "Lord Jesus, please get us a car park." You'd claim a car park in the name of Jesus. And I look back on that and I think, well, that's fairly trivial. Anyway, I was sharing this with a Catholic former nun friend of mine. She said, "Oh, you need to speak to his mum." And I said, "I beg your pardon." Now, we were driving into Moffat Beach. For those of you who know Moffs, on a day when it's working, it's full, and the coffee shops there are, it's all going on. And she says, "Hail Mary, full of grace, please save us a parking space." As we come around the corner, the combi van backs out of the thing and we drive straight in. It was the closest spot to the coffee shop, and I just looked at her and she said, "Ask his mum. Always ask his mum." And for a Protestant pastor and a former Catholic nun, it was like, yep, there's a TV show in this.
Don't you downplay my car parking fairies. But one might imagine a godlike figure up there going, "What? All these people praying for car parking spots? Can there not be something better, people?"
Yes, okay, and that's a really, so what do we decide are the things that matter in the way we live? What are the big ticket items?
Car parks are very personal. They are, and I know we sort of laugh about it, but that's what do you want out of life?
Yeah.
Before we die, we're getting old. What are we going to do? And we look back on life. I don't know about you, but you look back on life, about the good, the bad, the ugly, and then what else? We got a few. How many scores are we meant to live?
I guess it depends where you live. If you're lucky enough to win the genetic lottery and be a white guy living in Australia, expect a long and healthy life. If you were somebody else born elsewhere, maybe not.
Yes.
And I think that's another thing that I struggle with, that there's this sense of, faith can sometimes be a luxury. But on the other hand, I think that's interesting, because when I talk to people, particularly from Asia, who don't come from a European background. I mean, we live in Asia, but anyway, or the Pacific or something. But there's a sense in which we have boxes for our lives. So we got our working life, and we got our home life, and we have our recreational life, and some of us say we have a spiritual life, and we have these boxes.
We do. We go to church at Christmas and Easter.
Small boxes. And our work, we come home and so on. Whereas in many societies that are materially much less off but more spiritually aware, that's just life, and it all is part of a wholeness and a fullness. And I wonder if that's something we've missed in our Western suburban way of living.
Well, we really have won the lotto being here, not coronavirus notwithstanding, but we've had it so easy. And I look at sometimes the people, like you say, that are your friend that might be dying. Oh shit, what are we going to do? I need to find some faith. But if life is rolling along nicely and you've got the 2.2 kids, the 3 cars, the 4 televisions, the 2 investment properties, what more do we need? Because that, according to our social media, is success. You mightn't be happy, but that's why these conversations, you start talking to people about the meaning of life and they go, oh, they're gone now.
Yeah, because they're actually difficult questions. And I think that's the other thing is that, and it would be, it's funny because when life is good, it's easy to either ignore God, I don't need God, or to go, see, God has blessed me. I must deserve this in some way or whatever else. But then when things go, and the fertiliser hits the ventilator and it all goes south fast, so where is God then, and what is my sense of trust in that? Or is God punishing me? Or there's all that stuff that goes on, or there's this kind of shake your fist resentment. How do we live a life that whether it looks like this or that, it has a something solid that doesn't just begin and end in 70 years, but that has a now and forever thing to it. Yeah.
God is love. Is that right?
And those who live in love live in God. I think you're quoting, yes, you are quoting a letter from a bloke named John. And I guess the thing is then to work out what that looks like and how you respond to it.
Because plenty of studies, you're on your deathbed. What do I look back? What am I pleased with? What am I displeased with? It's never work, never the house, the car, the this, the that. I think it's the connections we make as humans.
And I think that's a really significant thing that I keep coming back to lately, is that the idea of God is about a community, that humanity is somehow wired to be together, and God in Christ and the Holy Spirit, that whole strange idea is a good reflection of that we're somehow meant to be connected. I love the word religion. People tell me, religion. I go, yeah, rightio. But the Latin, ligio, is the ligaments. It's the things that hold us together. And to religio is to reconnect us in ourselves, to one another, and to God. So you get that idea of, what are the connections? What have been the relationships? That's a big thought.
And so many, and this is what I absolutely love about your knowledge, so many words are misconstrued. And it's very hard, the English language, and you're reading a Bible which has translations that don't quite get it. So we're going, bloody Pontius Pilate, his best friend, they're bloody sexist over there, or whatever it is, and that's not the true meaning of it. So, like the Chinese whispers, the Bible, some of the things we get today, and to me that's irrelevant. I think the messages we get out of that, whether you believe in God or not, are fantastic. And if we can live our lives with those messages in mind, we'd all be better off.
And the moments, just those moments, I think the old Irish Christians called them thin places, where there are moments where you just feel like God is really near. It's like when the curtain just sort of goes apart a little bit and you get a glimpse, and you go, oh wow. And I think some of those moments are out there on the waves today.
Yes, I think so.
And I think instead of, the challenge for me is to get beyond, well, this is great, but to say thank you, God, for this moment and this place, this relationship, and how do we live in that? Yeah. Mate, thank you so much for your time. I know that you have some stuff that you need to do with grandchildren and all the rest of it, but thanks for the waves.
Thank you.
If you've come in sort of, and I have been rude enough not to reintroduce us in the last few minutes, Peter Woff, Phil Smith, we're with Bell's Faith Community on the Sunshine Coast, and on Thursday evenings we look for what's our story and just sort of have a yarn and share stories about our lives, and so you're welcome, and we get together online at the moment, of course, 5:30 Sunday afternoons here on this stream. This coming Sunday we're going to have a picnic in small groups, because we can do that within the COVID thing, at the Apex Park past the boat ramp at Golden Beach in Lamaroff Street. So if you've got a family group or a small group and you'd like to be a part of that, we're going to do a picnic lunch, and we'll break bread and spend some time together there as church. Every blessing. We'll see you again sometime. Thanks, mate.
Thank you.